All right. Welcome, welcome, everyone. I am so excited that you all are here. I could not be more excited about today's presentation. And for those of you who I have never met, my name is Michelle, and I'm a lead trainer with Breathe for Change. And for those of you who are new, just a quick snippet about Breathe for Change. We are an organization on a mission to enhance the health and the well-being of educators, students, and entire communities. And we run the world's only 200-hour wellness, SEL, and yoga teacher training that is specifically for educators and community leaders who care deeply about using wellness as a vehicle for healing and social change. And we've already trained over 5,000 educators since we started in 2015. So with that, what could be more healing and more important for social change than inclusivity? And I am so thrilled to have my friend, colleague, and inspiration to me, writer and educator, Tristan Katz, here with us. I am going to hand them the floor so that they can make use of this time, and I'll let them introduce themselves. So Tristan, take it away, my friend.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you, Breathe for Change, for having me. I'm really honored and excited to be here. I'm loving watching the number of folks in this Zoom space grow second by second as more people arrive. I'm going to share my screen, and I'll be very transparent with you all that I've never taught this in an hour. So let's really, fingers crossed that I can keep it to an hour. I usually teach this in at least a 3-hour setting because it's a lot to cover. But I'm going to aim to keep it to an hour and respect your time. And I'm also going to aim to hopefully have at least 10 minutes or so for questions at the very end. So as I share my screen and share my slide deck and do a lot of talking, you're welcome to participate in the chat box. I just won't be answering any questions in the chat box. If you need any support around tech questions or want to say hello, please feel free to do that. And Michelle and Cece from Breathe for Change will be looking through the chat box to make sure that you're being assisted if you need assistance. And I'm just going to repeat, if you share questions for me in the chat box, I might not see them and I definitely won't be answering them. But if you'd like to bookmark those questions for the end of our time together, I'll make sure to have some time for that. Fingers crossed, but that is my goal. Okay, so I'm going to share my slides and do a lot of talking and share a little bit about myself as well. So first of all, big welcome and thanks again to Breathe for Change for having me. We're going to be talking about creating safer spaces, trans inclusion in the classroom, in the school, fill in the blank. This could go for any space that you're holding for students, for kids, or for anyone in your life for that matter. And I just want to share a little bit about myself before I go any farther. My name is Tristan Katz. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a digital strategist. I specialize in what I call justice-focused digital marketing, mainly for yoga and wellness professionals. I do that through individual and group programs. I'm also an equity inclusion facilitator, and I teach group workshops and trainings and do individual consulting and coaching, primarily around queer identity and transgender awareness with an intersectional lens. I want to share a little bit too about my identities to give you some context. My identities and the lens that I carry through my own experiences definitely impacts how I hold this space and what I share with you today. So I'm a white-bodied, trans, non-binary, queer human. I'm able-bodied. I'm middle class. I'm college educated with a master's degree. I learned English as a first language, and I was born in this country of the United States. I'm a US citizen. I'm small-bodied. I'm Jewish. There are lots of ways in which I'm holding both privilege as a result of my identities, and I'm experiencing marginalization and oppression as a result of my identities. And both are happening simultaneously, depending on the context, depending on the environment, the day, the relationship, etc. So very briefly, I'm going to talk you through a little bit about what we'll be covering over the next hour or less. I'm going to lead us through a very brief grounding practice just so that we can get away from the screen for a second and check in with our bodies and our breath. I'm going to talk about the concept of creating safer spaces. I'm going to explore the 2S LGBTQIA+ acronym with a focus on trans awareness and identity. And I'm going to give definitions and context for that acronym. I'm going to share about pronouns and action steps you might consider as a space holder or educator. We'll talk about harm and repair. I'll offer some takeaways, additional resources, and again, as I mentioned, hopefully some time for Q&A. So before we go any further, I know many of us are moving Zoom screen to Zoom screen. I just want to give us a moment to check in and disconnect from screens. So I'll invite you to close your eyes or soften your gaze, or even just turn your face away from your computer, whatever you need to kind of give yourself a moment to tap into your breath. So again, you might close your eyes or soften your gaze or turn your eyes away from your computer screen. And take a moment to just notice your body as it breathes. I know some of us probably have consistent meditation practices, and maybe some of us aren't at all practiced in meditation. So check in with noticing your breath in this moment. Just notice what it's like to watch your breath moving through your body with each inhalation and each exhalation. And as we settle in here, if your mind wanders, you might notice that too, and gently invite yourself back to watching your breath as it moves in and out through your body. We'll stay here for a few more breath cycles, again, noticing your breath as it moves in and out with each inhalation and each exhalation. You might notice your belly moving, or your chest, your shoulders, the sensation of air moving through your nostrils. And then I'll invite you to take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And as we exhale out, you might make a sigh or a noise, something to release the air from your body with anything that you might need as far as a noise is concerned. So all together, we'll inhale through the nose and exhale through your mouth. Let's do that twice more. Inhale through your nose. Exhale out through your mouth. And once more on your own time. And as you're ready, you can gently open your eyes if they were closed. Thank you all for breathing together and taking that moment. I find it really important that we spend a moment connecting with our breath and just slowing down before we explore a conversation like this one. So before I go any farther, I want to say a few things that underlie the truths of this conversation that I carry into this setting. One is that there is no way to talk about trauma stemming from systemic oppression without replicating or triggering that trauma. I borrow this teaching from one of my teachers and friends and colleagues, Michelle Cassandra Johnson, who's an anti-racism educator. And she's really emphasizing the fact that the minute we start talking about something like gender or trans identity or racialized identity, that might bring something up in our bodies, depending on past experiences and depending on narratives that we hold relating to these identities and experiences. And we can hold that, right? I want to invite us to hold that with compassion and with presence and kindness, and take good care of ourselves both during this presentation and after. I want to acknowledge and name that homophobia, transphobia, and the systems of cisgender heteronormativity cause trauma. And so me just naming those words at all, and I'll explain cis heteronormativity for those of you who are new to that term, me even naming them all at all might bring up stuff in our bodies. And the truth is, we cannot guarantee safety for others. We have no way to know what each individual in a given space might need to feel safe. It's impossible to meet everybody's needs, and those needs might shift day to day and moment to moment. So to me, as a facilitator and educator and space holder, my goal is to create a safer space, and some might call this a brave space. Brave space to me acknowledges the difference between lived experience and learned experience. So some of us are living through transgender experiences. Some of us have lived experience of knowing what transphobia might be like. And some of us are learning about transgender identity and experiences and transphobia. Brave space is more aligned with equity, and it seeks to center and honor the needs of those most impacted by systems of oppression. And transphobia very much is a system of oppression. And brave space and creating safer spaces as well, both acknowledge that harm might occur in a setting, and we need to tend to that harm rather than brushing over it, ignoring it, or forgetting all about it completely. We need to tend to it both in ourselves and in our relationships with others. And lastly, brave space and creating safer spaces, this kind of language and these kinds of practices and concepts provide a possibility of greater accountability when harm occurs. They provide a possibility of genuine relationship building, particularly across lines of identity difference. They provide a possibility of transparency, of radical honesty, and vulnerability. When we use a term safe space and claim to hold a safe space or claim that we're in a safe space, we're inherently cutting ourselves off from acknowledging a deeper truth that harm could occur in that setting, and being in the question of what do we do when harm occurs? So I want to start here, which is unpacking the concept of gender. This is an illustration that I borrow from an organization which you could all benefit from bookmarking and looking at. It's called transstudent.org. And they've put together this model that they call the gender unicorn to help us understand something that many of us have been conditioned not to understand. I'll speak from my experience. I was raised to believe that you were either a boy or a girl based on your genitalia, and that it was that simple, end of story, that we could tell what people were as far as their gender was concerned based on appearances, and that it was all that simple and very black and white. The truth is, when you look at human experience across time, history, and space, you find that people have been living beyond the gender binary, beyond the binary construct of man and woman for as long as humans have been alive. But at some point in human history, a construct was created that said you're either a man or a woman based on your genitalia, and we all started conforming to that construct. We're at a time in human history where this is shifting clearly. That's why we're all here. And we're developing new language to describe the human experience. So words like transgender and non-binary are new, but the experience of living beyond the gender binary is not new at all. So if we start at the top of this model of the gender unicorn, you'll see that gender identity is shown by the little rainbow popping out in the thought bubble of the unicorn's head. So it's an internal experience. It's not visible from the outside. You can't see what someone's gender identity is based on their clothing style or their hairstyle or anything else that you might see from the outside expression. You might be a woman or a girl or a man or a boy. There are tons of other ways to describe gender identity experiences. In contrast, gender expression, you can see here through the green dots outlining the exterior of the unicorn. Gender expression is an external experience and an external representation. It doesn't necessarily equal gender identity. Those two things can be very different. So gender expression might be feminine, masculine, androgynous, though I tend to find that that's a term I don't typically use because we tend to think that anybody who's not a man or a woman is inherently androgynous, and that's not true either. So think of all of this like some might call it a spectrum, and to me, a spectrum has a linear line with a beginning and end point. I want to think of this more as like a sphere or a circle that has fluid movement and lots of different spaces all around the circle where you could locate yourself. And when you might locate yourself in one place as far as your gender identity and in another place as far as your gender expression. So sex assigned at birth is what we've been conditioned and taught to believe is somebody's gender, but those are two different things. So this is a key phrase here, sex assigned at birth. So, and that's based on genitalia, generally speaking, but it's also based on chromosomes, internal genitalia, DNA, et cetera, et cetera. Biological sex is also not binary. And that's a whole nother conversation that I'm not going to get into today for time's sake. However, I will say that when it comes to sex assigned at birth, we are, at this moment in our world and culture, assigned female at birth, and therefore considered AFAB is the acronym, AFAB, or we're assigned male at birth, AMAB, AMAB, AFAB, and AMAB. Now, that assignment moment is causing harm to a large amount of people. And it's not just causing harm to people who are actually trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming. That gender assignment at birth based on external genitalia is causing harm to all of us. Think about things like toxic masculinity. Think about things like fat phobia, body shaming, slut shaming, right? All of these things tie back to this understanding that you are supposed to be a certain way based on the gender and sex you've been assigned at birth, right? And romantic attraction, physical attraction, sexual attraction, emotional attraction is a totally different thing. And that's represented in the little heart space of the unicorn. It's very separate from gender identity and gender expression. I want to bring this model and concept into the workshop because it's important to me to acknowledge the ways in which many of us are holding privilege as a result of our identities, and many of us are pushed farther out into the margins and farther away from power, access, and ease given our identities. So I'm just going to pause here. The left side of the screen is an illustration from Sylvia Duckworth, who's an artist, and you'll see here, and if you just Google search Wheel of Power and Privilege, Sylvia Duckworth, you can find this on the internet and spend some time looking at it and locating yourself in this wheel. But some of us, this is all based on the way systems and culture have been established and then perpetuated over time, right? But some of us are pushed out into the margins and don't have things like access to easy healthcare, right? Or in the context of trans identity and experiences, easy access to public bathrooms, right? Or if you're, say, in a larger body or experiencing different levels of ability in your body, maybe airplanes aren't super accommodating for you. Maybe movie theaters aren't super accommodating for you, right? We're all having a different experience of the world based on our identities and the fact that dominant culture is set up to favor some at the expense of others. And it's important to me to bring this into the space so that we can start to understand the dynamics of this conversation, the nuances of this conversation, and the ways in which those of us who aren't cisgender, and I'll pause there to define that term. Cis is a Latin prefix for same. So if you're cisgender, it means that your gender identity is the same as that which was assigned to you at birth. If you're cisgender, you're experiencing much greater access to power, much greater access to ease, much more advantages given the way our culture and system and world is set up. If you're a cisgender man, even more so, right? If you're a white cisgender man, even more so. If you're a Black trans woman, you're pushed out farther, right? So all of these identities intersect and overlap to inform our experiences of the world and our relative access to safety, ease, advantage, and privilege. So I want to talk about the word transgender. Transgender means one who does not identify as the sex they were assigned at birth. It's that simple. However, transgender can look and be experienced in a wide variety of ways. There is no one way to be transgender. Transitioning as a verb can be done socially by changing one's names or pronouns, medically or surgically with hormone replacement therapy or surgical procedures to affirm somebody's experience of their felt sense of gender, legally through birth certificates or driver's license and the gender marker on those documents. There are lots of different ways to transition. Many of us have internalized a narrative that if you are trans and if you transition or if you have ever transitioned, it inherently means surgically, but that's not the case. And I want to underscore that, right? Surgery does not equal trans. Trans does not equal surgery. And it is also an umbrella term, much like the word queer, which is a word that has been reclaimed in more recent generations. Queer was originally used as a slur. It was a derogatory term, particularly at the height of the AIDS crisis. But queer has been reclaimed, and queer is now used as an umbrella term to describe anyone within the LGBTQ community. And similarly, trans is also an umbrella term. So here are some of the ways folks might fit into the umbrella term of transgender. One might be a trans man or a trans woman. One might be non-binary like myself. However, not all non-binary people identify as trans. One might be trans masc, meaning they lean more towards the masculine side of the spectrum, or they express themselves or feel internally more masculine. One might be trans femme and leans more towards the feminine side, or expresses or internally experiences themselves as more feminine. One might be gender nonconforming, gender queer, gender fluid, gender expansive. We've got a whole wide variety of ways to describe our experiences and relationships to gender. But this is essentially kind of the premise of transgender identity right here. And I also want to say that historically speaking, words like transvestite, transsexual, our language has been evolving. And the current best use to describe folks who are experiencing their gender outside of the gender binary or differently from the gender they were assigned at birth is transgender. And who knows what words we'll be using in another 10 to 15 years, right? So I want to name that. Some folks do still very much identify and feel empowered and affirmed using transsexual and transvestite, but generally speaking, as a culture, we're shifting away from using those words unless somebody uses them to describe themselves. This slide is a little blurry, but I want to bring in these facts from a colleague of mine, Megan Nicholson, who I'll reference at the end of our time together. Megan did the research between two different studies to break down the experience of trans kids from cisgender kids. And through these studies, they found that the rates of depression, anxiety, suicidality, and self-harm drop significantly when a trans kid is affirmed for who they are. So we're talking about something as simple as being sensitive and aware and using somebody's pronouns correctly that can actually save a life. And not just that, it can lead to widespread culture shift that can shift policy, which is what we deeply need right now, especially with all the anti-trans bills going around the legislature across the United States. I'm not going to dwell too much on this slide because I want to keep moving and make sure we have time for questions. Again, I hope, but I think it's important to bring this in so we can understand what happens when we other a trans kid or a non-binary kid or a queer kid, and what happens when we honor, affirm, and celebrate a trans, non-binary, or queer kid. And I'm going to talk about what I mean by honor, affirm, and celebrate. Before I go through that, I want to briefly break down the current iteration of this acronym. So the acronym has now moved from LGBTQ to LGBTQIA to what I am now using as 2S LGBTQIA+. And I know it's a mouthful. I'm bringing 2S in at the very beginning of this acronym in order to honor our Indigenous community members, the people who were on the land in the United States before I was, before white folks were, before any of us were, unless you're Native, unless you're Indigenous. In Indigenous culture in the United States, folks have been existing beyond the gender binary and with sexual fluidity for forever. Like, this is part of their culture. And Two-Spirit is the term to describe folks who exist beyond the gender binary and experience sexual fluidity. So I bring in 2S first to honor them since they were here first. The L stands for lesbian. That is, historically speaking, cis women who date other cis women. However, a trans woman might also be a lesbian, right? She might also date other women of all kinds, cis or trans, and she could use the term lesbian. Gay historically was used to describe cis men who date other cis men. Similarly, gay has been expanded given our understanding that gender is more expansive. Bisexual is for people who date across gender, across sex, who date both or and, you know. Transgender, we've identified. Queer, I explained earlier, as an umbrella term. You might be queer in terms of your sexual orientation. You might be queer in terms of your gender identity. Intersex is a really important word that I unfortunately don't have a lot of time to unpack, but some folks are born with genitalia or chromosomes that aren't clearly considered assigned male or assigned female. And they are often receiving procedures at birth to, quote, correct their genitalia. This is highly problematic, it is highly controversial, and it is highly traumatic. What we should be doing is encouraging those kids, those youth, to grow up and figure out where they land in the gender sphere circle, right? And not assigning them and making them their bodies conform with surgical procedures. A is asexual or agender. It means someone who doesn't experience sexual orientation, romantic orientation, or potentially gender, and they feel that they just don't have a gender. Please note that A does not stand for ally. I want to talk about pronouns. This is a pretty hot button topic when we talk about creating spaces for trans folks. And ultimately, there's a significant reason why when we start bringing in pronoun considerations into our settings, this is like step one for honoring and affirming kids and people who are transgender, non-binary, or queer. To me, it starts with being considerate about pronouns. So pronouns are words we use to substitute for names, and we use them for everyone, regardless of gender identity. If you're comfortable with the pronouns he, him, or she, her, then those are your pronouns. It's really that simple. You get to explore at any time. That's one thing that I also feel like we've not been taught historically, is that you get to figure it out. You get to try new things on. You get to try new language on. If you want to try on they, them and see how it feels and have some awakenings or some curiosity around that, you get to do that. We're not all confined to boxes. We want to break down the boxes, okay? We're not talking about creating a third box for people who are trans, non-binary, or queer, or gender non-conforming. We're talking about smashing all the boxes completely, okay? Some folks use two sets of pronouns, such as she and they. And some use neo-pronouns like ze, zer, and there are many other neo-pronouns out there. And some people want to be referred to with their name and no pronouns at all. I just want to note that if somebody uses two sets of pronouns like she, they, or they, he, or he, they, or I've even seen some folks use she, they, and he. If they use multiple sets of pronouns, then you put multiple sets of pronouns into your sentences when you're talking about that person. You don't just adhere to one because it's normative by the culture, it's normed by the culture, right? So for example, my friend Sarah went to the store. She came back with apples. And then Sarah realized they had forgotten to buy bananas. So she decided to go back to the store, and they went to the store this time to buy bananas. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. It's messy for the brain, but it is something we can do when we slow down and pay attention to the language we're using to refer to other people. And that is tip number one. When it comes to being sensitive and wanting to affirm someone, slow down. Slow down when you're talking, slow down when you're writing an email. Let me tell you how many emails I've seen come through where people are writing really quickly, and this misgendering is happening because they're not slowing down and paying attention to the grooves in the brain that are well established, right? We all have these grooves that we're operating from based on appearances. We're assuming somebody's a boy or a girl, or based on a name, we're assuming somebody's a boy or a girl. We can't make these assumptions anymore. It's not right. It's not fair. It's not fair to other people. It's not fair to ourselves. We're putting ourselves in boxes. We need to break the boxes down. We cannot exclusively, just like we can't know somebody's gender identity based on appearances, we can't know somebody's gender identity based on pronouns. So for example, I have friends who are assigned female at birth and use she, her, and identify as non-binary. It is up to each individual to define their sense of gender, and their gender identity might not be reflected in their pronouns, and vice versa, right? I want to note that they, them as a gender neutral pronoun can be used in the singular and the plural. This has been recognized by dictionaries, which makes it officially official. And I also want to note that we've been using they, them pronouns all the time when referring to people we don't know in the singular, right? Somebody left their wallet, I hope they return for it. Somebody left their book, I hope they come back for it. We do that all the time when we don't know somebody's gender identity in a singular form, and now it's time to do it intentionally because people are asking us to. And I just want to pause and emphasize to imagine how it would feel if you were to have to move through the world constantly having to assert your identity, constantly feeling and experiencing misgendering, invisibilization, marginalization, and outright harm. Normally at this point in the workshop, I would tell you stories about all the misgendering that I experience and what goes on for me and how I end up doubting who I know myself to be, because the world is constantly telling me, you're a woman, you're a woman, you're a woman. But guess what? I have done the work to figure out that I'm not a woman. And that's not up for other people to decide. That's up for me to decide. So once I've made that decision, I am asking the people in my life to honor, affirm, and celebrate that decision by gendering me correctly, by not sheing me, right? By using they, them, and not referring to me as a woman or a girl or whatever. So what to do when you make a mistake and you gender someone incorrectly, when you misgender someone? It's going to be different for person to person. It's going to be different for each relationship you're in. This is some general best practice considerations. One, acknowledge the mistake, own it, say the correct pronoun as soon as you're able to, because that will affirm the person when you've just unaffirmed them, right? So say the correct pronoun as soon as you're able to. Don't make a big deal out of it. Don't make it about you. It's not about you. It's not about how hard it is for you. It's not about how much you're practicing or how much you care. It's not about you. It's about the person who you just unintentionally harmed by misgendering. If requested, you might apologize genuinely and try to do better and thank someone if they've corrected you. Always thank someone if they correct you. It's exhausting to have to correct people. And in your own mind, you could explore repeating the person's name and pronouns 3 times to help build and reinforce that groove in your brain. Tristan, they, them, Tristan, they, them, Tristan, they, them, right? If you need to practice using gender neutral pronouns, there's lots of different ways to do that. Get a pet fish and give the fish a gender neutral name and a gender neutral pronoun, right? Get a stuffed animal, or just go for a walk with a friend and say, I want to talk about this workshop I took the other day with Tristan. They use they, them pronouns. Can I just tell you about them and what it was like to study with them so that I can practice using their pronouns correctly, right? Come up with ways to practice so that when you come into community and relationship with someone who's using gender neutral pronouns, you're already ready. And they don't have to do the labor to educate you, to correct you, or to support you in the learning process, which we are all in. I am in it too, let me tell you. I am rewiring my brain too, all the time. So when someone else messes up, this is another relationship-based question, right? Do you feel that it's appropriate for you to interrupt them? It might be, it might not be. Interrupting them is a great option though, if you feel it's comfortable to do so. You might correct them after the conversation privately. It really depends on the setting, the person, the group, etc. And I just want to underscore, do not ever out someone without their consent. It's not safe for us out there in the world. And that is just a fact right now. Here are some takeaways. And I'm like surprised at myself. We're starting to wrap up, which is great, which means that we'll have space for questions. Some takeaways. One, training is just the beginning. If this is your first training, I'm so glad you're here. I can't even begin to tell you how glad I am that you're here. Do more, right? Find some books, go watch a movie. I can email you a whole list of stuff where you can learn more. Take other trainings, study with other people who are speaking about this differently, right? Start following people on social media. I'm going to offer some folks to follow at the end of this time. Find some way to deepen your knowledge and understanding of queer experiences and community. Commit to practicing one way of creating more affirming spaces. That might be sharing your pronouns when you introduce yourself at the beginning of class, for example. It might be asking for pronouns when folks introduce themselves. And it might be checking in when you forget somebody's pronouns. That could be as simple as, Tristan, would you remind me which pronouns you're using? You might also consider cultivating a regular practice of checking in with your students or others, because people change their pronouns all the time. Cisgender folks have been impacted by the gender binary construct too. I mentioned this at the beginning. So reflect on how you felt affirmed or negatively impacted by this construct. Spend time in self-reflection so that you can better show up for others. It starts with each of us, right? Paying attention to ourselves and our experiences and the way our brains just naturally work based on conditioning and social constructs. Explore ways to address harm and other action steps to consider in creating more affirming spaces. Start these conversations with other people in your families and in your communities. I know that they might not be easy. Do it anyways when you feel ready to do so. I'm not saying after this training that you're an expert now, go off into the world and start talking to other people about it. Find ways to have this conversation, even if it means you fumble through as you're still learning. If you're cisgender, I would like to invite you to add your pronouns to your social media bios, your Zoom name permanently. There is a space now on Zoom that will prompt you to do that permanently if you log in on the web, your websites, your email signature. I want to see cisgender folks claiming their pronouns publicly in every place possible so that it's safer for all of the rest of us who aren't cisgender to eventually claim our pronouns too. The trans, non-binary, and queer community needs cis folks to normalize this practice, and pronoun considerations can lead to larger acceptance of trans identity and experiences. In general, abstain from gendered language. Instead of things like boys and girls, try everyone, or friends, or y'all, or folks, or kids, or students. Instead of making statements like girls experience X, Y, and Z when they're growing up, try things like people who are socialized as female might experience X, Y, and Z. I know it's a mouthful. This is the best language we have right now, and it's the most inclusive and the most affirming. Remember that pronouns are not a preference. We do not prefer to be referred to with certain pronouns over others, just like we do not prefer to be referred to with our names, okay? Similarly, we do not prefer to be referred to with that second sentence needs editing. Excuse that second sentence. We do not prefer to be referred to with our names. Our names are simply our names, right? I do not prefer to be called Tristan. I'm simply Tristan. And similarly, I do not prefer to be called they, them. My pronouns are simply they, them. For those of you who are messaging me privately in the chat box, I can't read those and teach this workshop, but I am going to offer my email address at the end of our time together. And when I offer my email address, I'll say a note about my boundaries around my email, but I would love to hear from you if you would like to contact me directly. So another takeaway, I mentioned this briefly, in order to facilitate a widespread culture shift that might allow greater safety for trans, non-binary, and queer folks, cisgender individuals must be willing to take action. And the seemingly small act of naming your pronouns as a cis person can make a world of difference. Think about how meaningful it would be for a trans, non-binary, or queer kid to come into a classroom where their teacher says, "Hi, my name is, and my pronouns are." That kid might immediately have a reaction in which they feel included, in which they feel welcomed. They might feel potentially seen for the first time that day. They might not be experiencing that even in their family. They might not even know that they're questioning their gender. We need to start doing this, right? Okay, some additional resources. First, I want to share a few websites. Them.us is a great tool. GLAAD, that's GLAAD.org, is a fantastic resource. And mypronouns.org is also incredible. Some people link to that in their email signatures to pass on the learning tool. Mypronouns.org will talk you through gender, and it'll talk you through using pronouns, talking about pronouns, the whole 9 yards. It's great. 3 books. The Quick and Easy Guide to They, Them Pronouns. It's teeny tiny. It's a graphic illustrated book. You can get it for like $10. I highly recommend it. If you're in a space where there's a community setting, like a school with a cafeteria or a teacher's lounge, consider buying a stack of these books and just placing them everywhere. Spread the word, please. Make these educational resources available to other people. Beyond the Gender Binary is written by an incredible activist and educator, Alok Vaid-Menon, whose name I reference at the bottom here. Beyond the Gender Binary is an incredible resource, breaking down the construct of the gender binary and how we have existed beyond it outside of time and space and history. And it's a really great resource and tool. And lastly, Pronoun Lowdown, Demystifying and Celebrating Gender Diversity is another really great tool and resource. Playful and fun and easy to read. All of these are super accessible for most of us, given our brain structures and chemistries. Some other educators to follow. This is for those of you who are big on Instagram. Alok Vaid-Menon, hands down, you gotta follow them. They are doing incredible work on Instagram and offering incredible free education on a regular basis. Similarly, Pink Manta Ray, Skylar is an Olympic swimmer. He's a trans man, and he is offering free education on his Instagram on a regular basis. And my friend and colleague who I referenced earlier with the statistics slide, Megan Nicholson, who also does work similar to myself. It's important to me that I credit Megan with that slide and reference their work as well. As I mentioned, I said I'd share some ways to stay connected with me. My email address is at the top of this slide. If you direct messaged me in this presentation, please feel free to send that to me via email so I can actually read it when I'm not teaching and holding the space, because there's just too much to cover for me to be in the chat box and be talking to you all at the same time. I want to be very clear that though I am available for ongoing support, consulting, I teach this work for a living. You can hire me. You can ask me to come join your learning space. I can meet with you one-on-one, et cetera, but I do not do this work for free. This work is based on my own lived experience, my own learning, my own studies, my own self-knowing. It requires a lot of my own energy and emotional labor. It is not easy to do this work. I might seem, based on how happy I am to be here, that it's easy, but it's really not, and it's very taxing. And so I do not do this work for free. And if you ask me questions via email that I'm not able to answer via email, I will send you my scheduling link and an invoice so that we can meet. And sometimes that might be as simple as just buying me a cup of coffee for a 15-minute conversation. Okay, I do want to make this work accessible. My website is katz-creative.com. I'm on Instagram at Tristan Katz Creative, and I do teach for free on this topic all the time on my Instagram. I just put out a post today about cisgender folks feeling threatened by pronoun considerations in group settings. So if you're interested in further free education, please follow me on Instagram and stay connected with me. I also co-host a podcast with a friend called All the Fuckin' Showing Up for Social Justice in Your Work. Excuse the F-bomb if we're in mixed company. And that podcast is available on Apple and Spotify platforms, and we talk about entrepreneurship and social justice. And lastly, you're welcome to subscribe to my newsletter and stay in touch with future workshops and trainings and offerings that I do. It's katz-creative.com/subscribe. I'm going to just take a moment and take a sip of water. We are done with the presentation. I'm honestly rejoicing because I wasn't sure I was going to do it that quickly. I am going to stop my screen share and see all of your faces, or at least however many I can fit in a Zoom screen, and pause. And I would like to open it up for questions. Before I do, I want to say a few things, and we've only got 18 minutes. So one, let's embrace non-closure. We're not going to answer all the questions that we might have in the next 18, 17 minutes, right? So this is potentially just a beginning, a starting point, and that's beautiful. And two, sometimes we can have questions that are well-meaning, but unfortunately might be worded in ways that have a negative impact. And I just want to name that. I know that there are folks in this space who are likely experiencing all the things that I'm teaching about. And so I want to be sensitive to them. I want to honor their needs. Again, though I can't guarantee their safety, if somebody phrases a question in a way that is harmful, I am going to use that as a teaching moment and explain the ways in which that question is harmful so that we can all be in that learning together. So I do see one hand. Is it Alessandra? Feel free to unmute as you're ready.
Hi, I'm sorry. I was having a hard time unmuting myself.
No
Thanks. I am a teacher. I teach 3rd and 4th grade students. And I was wondering if you had any insights into how be supportive of my students, at this younger age, how to be trans affirming in the classroom.
Yes. One, start talking about your name and pronouns, right? Normalize that conversation, as I said earlier. Start talking about the fact that gender is much more vast than assigned male and assigned female. Have that conversation. Bring in some of these tools that I shared, right? Some of these books are really accessible for kids. I'm thinking particularly of the Quick and Easy Guide to They, Them Pronouns. It's a graphic novel, essentially, and it's super small and super short. That is a great tool for kids. Find ways to bring in representation. So you might do some research on who can I show on television that's transgender or non-binary so that kids can see this if you're showing any television programming in your classroom. And lastly, I will just share that my friend and colleague, Megan Nicholson, whose name I referenced in the last slide, I believe the website is megannicholson.com. Megan is collaborating with two other folks on a workshop that's all about this work for kids specifically. And so it is a 3-part series, so it's quite a commitment, but they will be releasing recordings for each session. And I believe it starts next month. I would recommend going to their website and looking at upcoming events. And Megan will be delving into that topic much more deeply in how we do this for the kids. But to me, step 1 is saying your name and your pronouns, talking about what pronouns are, normalizing the fact that our pronouns can change, normalizing the fact that we can't assume what people's pronouns are, just like we can't assume what people's gender identities are. To me, having that conversation and having it multiple times, right? Not just once, is going to be one way in to supporting the kiddos in the spaces we hold. Thank you for that question, Alessandra. Kristen, I see your hand. Kristen, did you still have a question? I can't see your video, so I'm going to open it up. Please use the raised hand function if you have a question and would like to ask one, because I can't see everybody on the screen. The raised hand function can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen under reactions. Okay, Kristen. Let me see here if we can find you and give you the opportunity to unmute yourself.
I got it. Kristen, try now.
Great. Kristen, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much. Kristen Sheever, originally from Rochester, New York. I'm living in Canada because of the Defense of Marriage Act, but that's an entirely different beast. First of all, thank you very much for the work that you're doing. I've gone to school. I started school at 49 years old. I decided to go to college. I graduated in April, and I saw a gap in services at the college that I attended. So I pitched an idea. Right now, I have a job. I'm the new Diversity and Inclusion Associate at Sault College in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, just north of Michigan. Long story short, quick 15 seconds. Can you tell me what my most important job is? I want people to be safe. I want people to feel included. I've created a workshop of my own. That's why I attended yours. I went through pronouns. I talked about the severity of the repercussions of what happens to youth and to young adults, and how self-harm, addictions, and suicide rates are astronomically high. They're disproportionately represented so just 15 seconds worth of help.
Yeah, one thing I want to recommend, and I'm going to put this in the chat box as well, is an organization called the Transgender Training Institute. That is another great resource. Kristen, since you are involved in the work of DEI and trying to teach this work, I would recommend looking into their workshops. They offer short ones and then longer facilitation trainings. And I think they're going to be a great resource to support you as you continue to do that really needed work that you're doing. And thank you for doing it. I think, when I see somebody's pronouns in their Zoom name, that makes all the difference for me. And when cis folks start telling other cis folks to put their pronouns in their Zoom names, that is an incredibly important step. We think that pronouns don't mean anything, but they really do, because we're not all safe to claim ours, right? And when we see cis folks who are putting their pronouns in their Zoom name, my nervous system softens because I feel like I'm being seen and considered. So to me, that is like, back to, like I said to the last person, step one, pronouns in your Zoom name, especially when you're teaching on Zoom, that is like step one. So that is my 15-second response. I could, spend so much longer talking about what I think is important to focus on in your work, but you're also going to hear and learn, right, what's needed along the way. Trust what you hear and trust what folks are telling you when they say that they need this or they would benefit from that, right? And look into that resource I dropped in the chat box. And thank you for doing your work.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You too. I see the question about how to put your pronouns in your Zoom name. There are two different options. I'm going to speak to this briefly. We've got 10 minutes left. One, when you're on Zoom and in a Zoom room and you see your square, you see your face on the camera, hover over your square with your mouse or your trackpad. You'll see 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner. You'll click on the 3 dots and you'll locate rename. And then you can change your name for your Zoom screen. Alternatively, log into Zoom on your web browser and then go to your profile settings, your account settings, and it'll ask you if you want to put your pronouns in, and it'll ask you when you want to display your pronouns. Zoom now has a built-in consent piece, which is really fantastic. If for some reason those instructions are over your head or I spoke too fast because we're on a time crunch, do a Google search, Zoom pronouns, right? And that will help you as well. I just want to repeat, I don't have the space to answer direct messages right now. I'm going to focus on the folks who are raising their hands. And if you have a message for me that you want to exchange with me privately, please do email me. My email is available for all of you. I will type it into the chat box as well. I know I displayed it on the last slide. And again, I have boundaries and thank you for respecting them, but you are welcome to email me. I just don't do this work for free. Amber, you were the next hand I saw. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm an educator in North Carolina, and although we are in a pretty progressive area, North Carolina traditionally isn't very open. So I'm just concerned about maybe getting some backlash from parents. So is there a way that I can ease this into my classroom as an inclusive space, but at the same time maybe calm the fears of the parents that of the unknown, I think is probably their biggest fear. So.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind for me is if a parent is having some, first of all, any fear is rooted in transphobia. So I want to name that, right? And I also just want to say transphobia is in the air we breathe, it's in the water we drink, it's everywhere. If you watch the movie Disclosure, I'm going to type that into the chat box too. Disclosure. It's on Netflix, and it'll help show you the way in which we've all been deeply conditioned with subtle transphobia across the media and Hollywood, et cetera, et cetera. So I understand that when you go into a conversation with a parent, there is a lot of loaded stuff going on there. There's a power dynamic going on there. There's you trying to aim for a kid's well-being. The parent might not even understand that that's what you're doing. I want you to be very sensitive to that power dynamic and the fact that the parent might not have the awareness that you do and might be in a very different place in this learning process. The mypronouns.org website, I'm going to drop that into the chat box again. I would send that to any parent as a primary learning moment, because it doesn't just break down pronouns, how to use them, how to be considerate, but it talks about gender and the nuances of gender too. And the other thing I would say, and I know I'm offering a lot, hope you're taking notes or want to go back to the recording. Again, I'm just trying to stay sensitive to time. The other thing I would say is always coming back to the simple teaching that I started with. We have all been taught that gender is easily discernible based on genitalia and appearances, and that you're either a boy because you have a penis or a girl because you have a vagina. It is not that simple. Human beings are way more vast than 2 different categories based on some physical body part. So finding a way to talk about that for parents is going to be very key. And that is what I will offer there. Thank you for that question, Amber. Katie, I see your hand.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. I did have to jump out to pick up my kid from school. So if I'm asking something you answered already, I'm so sorry. But as a parent with a trans kid in a school district, who transitioned in first grade and he's now in fifth, I find that him being the youngest trans student in our district has been a struggle, because every school, every class he goes to, it's like a first, and the changes that need to happen usually happen because of me forcing or being super annoying to people. But I'm wondering if you have any recommendations on how I can get ahead of the game, because right now it's like he tells me this and I'm like, okay, we need to address this. I got trainings in our district, and I'm trying to get some bathroom change happening. But are there things going up middle school, high school that like kids need that I might not be aware of and he doesn't know because he's just a kid?
I would call ahead to any place that your kid is going and ask if they've done trans competency training. And if not, I would direct them to resources, and I would endlessly advocate for your kid. And then I would get other parents to join you in that fight. And to me, that kind of leverage is what's needed to make the changes, right? One voice isn't going to do it, unfortunately. Right. And the next thing I just want to say is, take care of yourself, Katie, because you are fighting the good fight on behalf of your kiddo. And I get emotional just thinking about it. Like, it is so needed, and you have to be resourced in order to show up for your kid, right? You have to be resourced. You have to be well. So I can, go on and on, but I want to have space for one or two more questions. And thank you, Katie, for doing what you're doing to advocate for him.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Maggie, I see you, and your hand has been up for a bit.
Hey, thank you so much. Sorry, I was waiting to unmute. So I'm a high school teacher in central Pennsylvania, which brings all sorts of things with it. And I really want, and I'm feeling a lot, I work within the theater, I work with a lot of different kids, and I need to somehow get through to my administration that my colleagues need this, because they always talk to me like I just don't understand transgender and I don't have the right words, or like I want to record you and just play you for them, but I know they have questions. How do you suggest going to someone like administration and saying, my kids, our kids need this, like now, and then being obviously reaching out to you and making sure you get paid for your time to train them? But how do I go to the administration without, I'm too passionate. I get in trouble for my passion.
Yeah, let me tell you, I do too. So I really feel that. Thank you, Maggie. I mean, thank you for your passion. We have to be on fire in this, right? We have to. And we have to figure out how to share our voices without shutting people down, and also like managing their reactions is not our responsibility. And yet it impacts us. So like we're holding all the mess of it, right? The way you phrased it, like your kids need this, is a really important start. I would emphasize the fact that the times are changing, and if we don't get on board, they're going to freaking pass us by, and we're going to be causing so much trauma to so many people in the process, right? We have to be at the front lines when we're advocating for others. We have to be standing up. We have to be using our voices. We have to interrupt every instance in which we see something happening that's harmful or problematic. I'm talking about that as a white person who is seeking to do that in the work of anti-racism, which is freaking ongoing and forever as I continue to unlearn. And I'm talking as someone who's being impacted by gender dynamics and transphobia, right? I'm aware we have 2 minutes left. So I just want to think about, Maggie, your question, bringing in trainings. Yes. sending them news articles. This is, if we were to unpack the nature and culture of white supremacy, I would talk about how problematic it is to rely on the written word as everything. However, because so much of us and our culture and world is influenced by the power of the written word, and we live in a white supremacist system, it is a tool that we can use to fight hatred, right? And so when I say the written word, I'm thinking specifically of the New York Times publishing an article on they, them pronouns. They just did it in the last week. Google search New York Times, they, them pronouns. Send that to your administrators, right? And say, we have got to get on board. We've got to get ahead of this because these kids are coming into our spaces and we're hurting them when we need to be supporting them, right? So those are some of my thoughts. I'm going to pause there. Thank you, Maggie, for your question and for being in this. Appreciate you. Appreciate all of you for showing up for an hour of this content and this training. I know we're at our time. Please do stay connected with me. I do teach this in longer formats. If you want to dive in more deeply, I will have workshops coming up in the future. And the last thing I wanted to say was I saw many folks in the chat asking for my slides. I do not share my slides. Those are something that I put a lot of time and energy and labor into. And this information changes all the time, right? So what we're talking about now and the language we're using now might shift in another month or in 6 months. So I don't want to make my slides available and say, take this and pass it on, right? I want you to come to more workshops. I want you to come to more trainings. I want you to stay involved so you can keep your pulse on the shifting conversation as we continue to come up with language to describe the human experience. Okay. Thank you all. Take really good care of yourselves. If you are in the work of seeking to be an ally, this can bring up stuff for you too. So be sure that you tend to yourself, water, food, air on the skin, laughter, crying, a good movie, pet with a four-legged creature, whatever it is, just give yourself some self-care as you move through the rest of your day. Thank you all for your presence, your participation, your questions, and your support, and for just being here. And I'll look forward to being in space with you again soon. And for Breathe for Change, thank you, Breathe for Change, for doing this and having this training. Really appreciate Michelle and Cece for putting this together and inviting me. I'm really honored. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so very much, Tristan. That was incredible. And also I can feel the love, the amazing energy in the space. Thank you all for showing up with your questions and your care, your curiosity, your open-mindedness. This was so powerful. I'm really moved, and I'm just so grateful that we get to do this work together. It's so important. And thank you again, Tristan.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. You will receive the recording. Keep doing the great work that you are doing in the world. And so much love. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, everyone. Take good care.